Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. Today's Do You Know question is, do you know what Catholics mean when they speak about the last things? As we end our liturgical year, every liturgical year ends with a note or focus on the end times. As a matter of fact, if you look at the liturgical year, the liturgical year ends and the liturgical year begins with the focus on the end times. The lectionary readings all speak about the coming of the end times, and usually when we speak about that, we refer to as death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Those are usually the four components, if you want, of the last things or the end times. And what we have to say up front is that we know very little about these things, since we don't know much. No one has come back to tell us much about this. We had to project, if you want, based on what we think and believe. So in other words, we have a faith stance with regards to these issues, but we don't have very many facts as to what's going to happen to us afterwards. However, that shouldn't prevent us from speaking about these things, simply because we want to realize what the implications of these are for our faith lives. And so from our faith stance, we need to at least talk about these things, even though we have to always acknowledge that we would be very limited in our understanding of these things, simply because we are limited and we don't know what happens after we die. If we look at our tradition, to be honest with you, one of the things you have to explore the fact is that in the past, much of the way we image these things reflected our understanding and image of God. So in other words, in the past, for example, we had an image of God that was primarily perceived as a judgmental or juridical God. A God who gave us rules and regulations, and we were expected to follow them. And if once we died, the events of our lives were presented to God, and He would make the final judgment based on whether we followed His guidelines and His desires, or whether we didn't. And then the result was we either merited a reward, which was heaven, a place of angelic beauty and so on, or hell, a place with devils and torture and fire and all that. So it was basically based on essentially our image of God. Now, some people are very comfortable with that image of God, and they can actually show you proof texts from the Bible which reinforce that image of God. However, through a lot of modern studies, and both in theology, a lot of scripture study, as well as some of the vision and some of the teachings coming out of the Second Vatican Council, our image of God has shifted, and has shifted in the direction of the more biblical notion of the Old Testament, as well as the biblical notion that Jesus surfaces in his own teaching. And what is this image of God? Well, this image of God is a God who creates us out of pure love from the very first moment of our conception. God creates us out of love and invites us, calls us into a love relationship with God from the very beginning, and gives us the freedom and the ability to respond to that through our free choices and so on. And so, as a result of that love invitation, which is always with us, God is always faithful, God never takes back God's love invitation, we are the ones who ultimately, through our lives, have to make a decision based on our freedom and our conscience. We have to make decisions whether the actions that we do are towards God and in relationship with God, or away from God, and so on. So we make those choices. And so the actions of our lives and the choices of our lives become kind of an indicator of the choices that we are making in response to God's invitation of love, and so on. Death now. Death is a natural result of a process that is limited. We are limited creatures, and death is a natural result of that. It is not, by the way, punishment for sin that some have articulated from the scriptures. That is not the image of God. That rather, death is a natural process. So what happens upon death? Well, what happens upon death is God's loving call and invitation is always there and continues to be there beyond death. We, like throughout our lives, we at that point have to decide, do we want to be with God for all eternity, or do we want to be away from God for all eternity? And being a desire to be with God for all eternity results in heaven, and a desire not to be with God, or a choice not to be with God results in hell, as we would articulate it. But God's love never gives up on us. We are the ones who have to decide whether we want to respond to God or not, both through our lives and even at the point of our death and after death. So in rethinking these last things, death is a natural process. Judgment is something not that we put on God, but God invites us into love relationship, and we are the ones who make that judgment. And heaven and hell are as a result of the choices that we have made with God's grace and with God's help. So I hope this has helped to explain just a bit of some of the shifts that have occurred in our understanding, the Catholic understanding of the last things. And I hope you will return again to more Do You Know series questions as we continue to explore many of our teachings in our faith traditions. Thank you very much.